Okay. All right. Okay. Absolutely.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Myers-Montgomery, but I just go by my last name, Montgomery. I'm from Southern University Law Center. I am a second-year law student going into my third year of law school. In addition, I also am an MBA student. And in addition to that, before I came to law school, I was an engineer and I worked for the United States Navy for 5 years. So, to give you just some of my background about why I'm interested in the subject, not only comes from my military background, but also my civil rights background working for the NAACP. So my presentation is called Militarized Police and Unpermitted Protests, Implementing Policy that Civilizes the Police. Now, when you think of militarized police and unpermitted protests, the first thing that should come to mind is what happened in Ferguson. But what happened in Ferguson is only a progression of what's been going on for the last 60 years. So what we see here is we first started off with police dealing with protests. Then as the protests got even more larger and radicalism came into play because of college students, what we see here is Kent State. So we went from police to dealing with the National Guard. This picture here is now from 1992 with the Rodney King riots. And again we see the National Guard in military uniforms. But now fast forward into 2000 and the rise of SWAT and SWAT teams. This is where we really start to see the rise of militarized police. So we went from police handling protests to the National Guard, back to the police. Now our police look more like military soldiers. Next. So what does it mean to be militarized? What does that mean? That means having vehicles that military uses. Right here we see a robot. We see a robot that has basically bulletproof shields attached to it. Next, we see this armored personnel carrier. Now, if I were to black out the name State Trooper, you would think that that's something going on in Ukraine, but these are the kind of vehicles that are on our city streets. This right here is called a Lenco Bearcat. Now, when you look at it, it's basically a street legal tank. There's a company called Lenco that builds these machines for police. They were originally designed for use in Afghanistan. Now, you look at this vehicle, and the tire comes up to my waist. So when you think about how large these vehicles are, you see that there's a turret on top, and that's bulletproof glass and bulletproof armor on it. Next, we're also talking about when you're militarized, you have the weapons, the equipment, and the uniform. These officers right here are carrying M4 carbines, which are the same military rifles that are used in Afghanistan, used by special forces. You also see Remington 870 shotguns, but look at the uniforms. The uniforms are the same uniforms our military is using, but these are our police. These are the police that are rolling around in the squad cars, but then when things happen, you see them dressed up like this. In this picture down here, that's a grenade launcher. Now, what we saw from the Ferguson protests where they were shooting tear gas, but those same launchers fire pyrotechnic grenades, incendiary grenades. All you have to do is just change out the grenade, and that launcher shoots it. Next, please. Lastly, we have the tactics training and procedures. Click on it, please. So I want to give you an idea of what kind of training police get.
Keeps everybody in that stack safe. They get stacked up the way they're going to be. Yep, we're going with the countdown. Here we go.
So when we see what it means to have militarized police, it's not only the vehicles, it's not only the weapons and equipment, but it's also the training. So what you just saw was a group of police officers being trained by ex-special forces members. So what are these military tactics doing in the hands of our police? Well, people always ask, okay, well, how did this happen? How did these weapons, how did this equipment, how did these vehicles get on our streets? And it all starts with the DoD 1033 excess use program. As you know, the Department of Defense spent billions of dollars on military equipment that they never got to use. So this equipment was sitting in supply depots just rotting away. Well, they said, okay, well, we still need a way to use it. So the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security came up with a genius way of making sure that the police agencies are able to use the equipment. Basically, the police agency files for a grant to receive the actual military equipment. The military equipment comes from the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security transfers money, and the equipment goes straight to the police department. So, now we're dealing with the First Amendment and protest permit system. The nexus between the militarized police and the First Amendment. Go ahead. So, First Amendment and protest. The founding fathers of the Constitution, they wanted to make sure that the people could speak out against their government. They realized that if you don't have the system in place where the people can actually criticize the government, then what you will have is a tyranny. Next, please. So, what are our First Amendment rights? Well, the Constitution says no state shall make any law infringing the people's right, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government to redress their grievances. So basically, I should be able to say what I want, talk about my government, talk about things that bother me, and the government shouldn't be able to stop me from speaking. But what happens? So how did we go from our police looking like this to looking like this? Yes. It all started with the Black Panthers. Well, how did it start with the Black Panthers? Well, the Black Panthers, what many people don't realize is Dr. P. Duke, my frat brother, member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, actually went to law school before he started the Black Panthers. So here it is, he was a constitutional law scholar and was actually putting the First Amendment to use. So not only the First Amendment of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, but also the right to bear arms. So you see right now our Black Panthers standing on the California Capitol steps with rifles, and it was perfectly legal. After the Black Panthers pulled this, all of our gun legislation started coming in place, and a thing called the protest permit system came in place. Now, the government had the right to be able to say, well, if you or I want to actually protest, we have to file for a permit with the city. Well, there's inherent distrust in that system when you have to ask for permission to protest against this very same person that you're protesting. Next, please. So, I said, how do we prevent a lot of these abuses that go on? Not only just with militarized police and unpermitted protests, but with police brutality, because it's all tied in together. So, I said, look, let's try body cameras. Next. The next thing that I said, and I also wrote legislation dealing with this. So with the body cameras, I also said that if you're going to carry less than lethal weapons, you have to first feel the pain of it. So just like officers, when they have to carry tasers, they get tased themselves. Well, this is beat-back shotgun, but this is the rules that beat-back shotgun leaves. So once officers feel that pain, I think they'll be less likely to use it on someone else. Next. Also, easy to read and identifying insignia. So all you see is police coming at you. You don't know what agency they're from. You don't even have an idea what officer it is. So when you go to try to file a complaint, the only thing that you don't have is evidence and identifying information. All you know is the police pulled their guns on you. I don't know who, and I don't know what agency they were from. Next. Also, tougher sanctions. If the police officers know that they can lose their jobs behind pulling this like this, behind police brutality, I think that would curb a lot of the injustices that have been going on. Next. So the proposed framework that I came up with my legislation is basically bringing the power of the people back to the people and out of the hands of the police. So now the police are actually accountable to the people. So the Citizens Oversight Committee is responsible for gathering all the information requests and gathering all the evidence. Once they decide that they have enough evidence to pursue prosecution, that is our forte, is research. So making sure that it's not taken from an anecdotal perspective, but from an actual research and qualitative and quantitative perspective. And then next, making sure that we have legislative action. So future concerns, as I wrap up, future concerns are basically unpermitted protests and riots being defined as domestic terrorism. Seems like a far stretch, but no one expected that a simple protest on city sidewalks would result in tanks being brought out. So, it's something to think about. Also, police agencies as mini intelligence agencies. There's a lot of federal money going into these local police departments, and a lot of that information is also being sent to the federal agencies. Lastly, my name is Myers-Montgomery, and you can reach me via email or my YouTube channel or even Instagram. And I thank you for your time. All right. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, the topic that we discussed is very bright, but one thing that is clear is who takes responsibility for the police action? Is it the police or the boss? Because we know the police is a disciplined force and they follow instructions. Having been in the military, you know that very well. So if the police shoots or act brutally towards a criminal, who takes the responsibility? Is it the police or the boss? That's number one. But in case the police takes the responsibility, then do you think beginning with the curriculum of training the police is a good starting point to address responsibility?
I'm glad that you asked that question. To answer your first question, in my legislation, what I actually said was that the police officer and his commanding officer and superior officer will actually be accountable. So, in order to use that type of force, it has to come down from a commander, basically the third in line from the police chief. That kind of level of force, that authorization for that level of force, has to come from very high up. So making sure that the people who are responsible for making the decisions are also accountable, and the individual officers for the actual individual abuses. For the next question that you asked about the training and curriculum, there has to be a total revamp of the way that we look at policing. The strange thing that we don't realize is that military and the police, there's always been an uncomfortable relationship between the two of them. And what I mean by uncomfortable relationship, dealing with the citizens. So from the very start of our police system after the Civil War, and prior to the Civil War, we were actually using soldiers to do our policing. Then now we have the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevented using military personnel to actually do local police functions. So, but there's always been that nexus, because when you see veterans come out of the military, the first thing that a lot of times they do is go to law enforcement. So they bring that training and also that mindset to police forces. And the police forces see those individuals as valuable because they bring in specialized knowledge and specialized skills. So we really have to go in and do a lot of retraining, but also rethink the way that we conduct policing. Does that answer your question?
I noted that you thought that body cameras were a solution possibly to police brutality and trying to control it, but police officers have control over that. What if it just drops off during the middle of a confrontation? Then you have no recording. Then what do you do?
I'm glad that you asked that. In my legislation, I actually wrote that if for any reason that when the committee, the Citizens Oversight Committee, sends a video request, and you don't have your body camera, or the data is corrupted, or something happens to the data, regardless of it, automatic 10-day suspension, unpaid. So now officers there's an incentive to make sure that your equipment works.
Yeah, that answers my question. But in light of the most recent incident where this guy was shot in the back 8 times, is that going to be enough just to suspend the guy?
I have to actually go ahead and explain all my legislation to you. All right, so anytime that a person is killed, automatic 30-day suspension. Automatic. Regardless if it was for cause or without cause, if it was justified or unjustified, that will be figured out later. But automatic 30-day suspension. But when you make a conscious decision to shoot somebody, you'll think twice about it.
Well, I just want to, I don't know, agree. I just want to first say this is a very different topic that I'm used to hearing. I don't think anyone ever highlighted the transition that the police has made throughout time. Who knew that it stemmed from the Black Panther Party? Wow, that was happiness. But I think my question is, how far are you with the legislation? Like how long has that progressed with the legislation that you were reading? Like how far are you with it?
I'm finished writing it. I'm just trying to get it pitched. I'm just pitching it to legislators.
Okay.
It's been written. It's whenever you write I wrote this paper as part of the legislative draft of the policy making seminar.
Okay.
So in order to write policy, in order to actually write legislation, you have to have the research to back it up. So with the research, we follow, it's called the Kippy analysis. Basically, you take rule, opportunity, capacity, communication, interest, process, and ideology. So now instead of looking at it from a quantitative sense, we now look at it from a qualitative sense of what influences behavior. And there's things called the role occupant, which is you and I, the implementing agency, which is the actual officer, and then even the officer has an implementing agent. So basically, a change in the implementing agent's behavior will change the role occupant's behavior. And I took it from the perspective of the officer being the actual role occupant, and a change in his superior's behavior would change his behavior. So in my legislation, I made sure to bring a lot of accountability to the superiors because it's very easy to blame the officer. But we don't realize that that decision to